So what I'm about to show you is one of the best examples of why you simply cannot rely on any news articles from Western officials or any direct statements from Western officials without double and triple checking for its veracity. So Mr. Ben Wallace served as the UK's Secretary of State for Defence until he recently resigned toward the end of August this year. And yesterday, he decided to publish this article in the Daily Telegraph. Now I urge you to read the article for yourself and come to your own conclusions on whether it conforms to the reality of the battlefield or not. But here are some of the highlights from this article. So Mr. Ben Wallace says that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is succeeding slowly but surely as they are breaking through Russian defense lines. And yes, that is a direct quote. Later on he says, when hope is combined with the right equipment, there is no stopping Ukraine, and that we in the West must continue to back Ukraine with funding and equipment until the job is done. The most optimistic of his assessments is that the Russian army is, and I quote, cracking, and that Ukraine has learned new tactics to overcome horrendous minefields. And mostly that, and I quote again, we are witnessing the beginnings of the Battle of Crimea. So he should join the Ben Hodges camp of Crimea by summer.
That before, okay, boom, boom, duck and dive and take one terrorist out, next get the AK, go Rambo, take out all of fucking Pakistan with a G.
But then Sky News did an interview with Lesia Vasilenko, the People's Deputy of Ukraine, who is on the ground in Ukraine. And she, after proper probing from the journalist, had to concede the exact opposite of what Mr. Ben Wallace has said.
The counteroffensive is going as planned. Is it going as planned? Well, as much as we can have it going as planned with the amount of weapons and the quality of the ammunition that we're getting. The steadier the deliveries and the bigger the deliveries of the armaments for Ukraine, the faster the counteroffensive can go.
That's the problem is you've regained, what, less than 1% of the ground that you lost before the invasion?
Unfortunately, that is the case.
And you only have like another month to go before?
Another month or so before the cold and the winter settles in, before we will have to actually pause until the springtime. And this is the sad news for us, and I think not just for us, but all the countries that are supporting Ukraine right now.
Is that continuing? Because I get the impression, I'm certainly told, that there is you're having to try harder and harder to get aid specifically from Europe and other Western countries.
It is getting harder and harder because Russia is winning the battle of a protracted conflict today.
So they are winning?
In terms of protracted conflict strategies that they're trying to impose on Ukraine and the world, unfortunately, we have to say that they are gaining the upper hand yet again. They have done this back in 2014. The lessons weren't learned. The aid was being delivered too slowly and at a non-stable rate, and this is the results that we are getting. I am a firm believer that Russia could have been stopped with their escalation of the aggression in February 2022, when Ukraine was asking for weapons through January, through October, November, December 2021, but was not being taken seriously, and when the offer on the table for us Ukrainians was to surrender to Putin's demands.
Talk about a parallel universe. In essence, Mr. Wallace is advocating for increased aid and support to Ukraine, and says that before he resigned from his post, he asked the PM Rishi Sunak to increase the funding from 2.3 billion to 4.6 billion to be pledged to Ukraine from the UK this year. And then we take a look in the comment section, and we can at least see that the readers of the Telegraph have some critical thinking. So let me read just a few of these comments. So the most recent comment is a long one, and it says, I can't help but think that Ben Wallace is subject to magical thinking. He sounds just like Baghdad Bob. If one actually looks at the situation, it seems to me that the Ukrainians have got absolutely nowhere while losing huge numbers of troops. It is also the case that this war, which essentially amounts to a sort of civil war, given the history of the place, is one that the Ukrainians cannot possibly win in the long run. just as the Confederacy could never win against the Union in the American Civil War. It is also important to understand that from the Russian perspective, Western and US interference in Ukraine represented an existential threat to their perceived security, and consequently, the Russians are not going to walk away. In this conflict, there are no good guys and bad guys. All the players are pretty bad, including Zelensky and the Azov brigades. Best to negotiate at this stage of the game, rather than pointlessly lose more lives, especially since the regions currently occupied by Russia want to be with Russia in any case. And then literally, the very next day, as if to clear the record or set the record straight, and to slap Mr. Wallace back to reality, the Daily Telegraph publishes this article. And the article referenced Mr. Wallace's statement as if to immediately set the record straight that the UK is running out of support for this war. It continues to say that the Western alliance has suffered a series of blows in recent days, with support for Ukraine dropped from a US stopgap budget bill, the election of a pro-Russian party in Slovakia.
V médiách sa otvorene hovorí o tom, že v radoch ukrajinskej armády sú čistí fašisti. Zoberte si pluk z Azova, ktorý je preukázateľne fašistický pluk. Viete, čo je na Slovensku povedané, že banderovci a takíto všelijakí, ktorí bojujú, to sú iba nejakí uliční bitkári na okraji spoločnosti. Ja som ešte ale neuvidel uličného bitkára so samopalom a tankom, alebo s delom. Oni sú predsa súčasťou konkrétnej armády a robia hrozné veci. Dokonca sme šokovaní, že im naťahujú červené koberce v zahraničí. Kto nemo a účelovo podporuje takéto javy v roku 2023, ide proti odkazu slovenského národného povstania. My musíme klásť hrádze fašizmu a nacizmu vo všetkých podobách a vyzývam najvyšších ústavných činiteľov, aby takéto prejavy, používanie fašistických znakov a symbolov jasne odsudzovali, pretože oni sú len ticho.
And rose between Poland and Kiev, which was Ukraine's biggest supporter and which I covered on this channel in a recent video. So the article, citing senior military sources, says that we've given away just about as much as we can afford, and that while we will continue to source equipment to provide for Ukraine, what they need now is things like air defense assets and artillery ammunition. And we have run dry in both.
Веди. Упреждение більше. Давай, вогонь.
But it's not just the UK, it's the entire Western Alliance. And here's a quote from the article. We cannot keep on giving from our own stockpiles, said a European official who was granted anonymity to speak frankly about a politically sensitive issue. That very same official said while there is still public and political support for Ukraine's fight, we have given everything that will not endanger our own security. But even that statement about there still being public and political support from the West is a bit shaky. Look at CNN, perhaps one of the biggest Ukraine supporters, published an article since the 4th of August entitled, and it reads, according to a CNN poll conducted by SSRS, 55% of Americans say that Congress should not authorize additional funding to support Ukraine, and 51% said that the US had already done enough. This is a drop from 62% in February of 2022 who thought that the US should do more.
Już nie przekazujemy żadnego uzbrojenia na Ukrainę z tego względu, że my teraz sami się zbroimy w najnowocześniejszą broń.